Hi everybody, welcome to History Doodles. Today we're going to be talking about Julius Caesar and some of the events surrounding the death of the Roman Republic. Without further ado, let's get into it. This is an incredible painting that shows a major turning point in history, and that's the aftermath of the assassination of Julius Caesar. Here we see Caesar's lieutenant, Mark Antony, showing Caesar's body to an angry mob who's wielding knives. The knives are alluding to a conspiracy to murder him just before this event took place. But to really understand why this is such a big deal, we need to talk about the man, Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar himself was a very complicated and polarizing figure. On the one hand, he was brilliant. He had an aptitude for military and political action that is legendary. He was loved by soldiers and by the common people. And he was a person with a confidence that is remarkable, and it's really hard not to admire his persona. Now, on the other hand, he's responsible for plunging the Roman Republic into a bloody civil war. Not single-handedly, I want to emphasize that Caesar alone was not responsible for taking Rome from a republic to having an emperor. That was a lot of people and a lot of circumstances, but he did seriously help the process along. And by the time of his death, he would be the dictator of Rome for life. As if that isn't bad enough, he would basically conducted genocide. We're going to get more into that later, but he invaded and conquered an area known as Gaul, which resulted in the murder of up to 1 million people, with the same amount being enslaved. So you definitely can't say he was a good guy. But to be fair, our modern standards for our leaders are much different than they were 2,000 years ago. Anyway, everything about this guy's life had a mythical quality to it, and his boldness shows up very early. The ancient historian Suetonius relays an amazing story in his biography of Caesar and the 12 Caesars, about how he was almost murdered before any of his impact on Rome got started. In 82 BC, there was a monumental event in Rome, where a Roman consul named Sulla marched with his army into Rome and imposed his will on the government and the people. He mandated reforms, and he put up a list of people who basically had a bounty put on their head, promising a reward if anyone could kill them and bring back their head to Sulla. What ensued was a reign of terror, where people were murdered in their homes and had their entire estates confiscated. And now the 18-year-old Julius Caesar was caught up in all of this because of his association with Sulla's rival named Marius, though he was not immediately put on the list of men to be killed. Either way, though, this must have been a terrifying experience, and on his behalf, some in his family pleaded his case why he should be unharmed. After some convincing, he was going to be allowed to live on the condition that he divorce his wife, Cornelia. And in the face of this strong man with his life on a razor's edge, Caesar said no, he would not divorce Cornelia. And this marked him to be added to Sulla's proscription list, and Caesar would have to flee Rome and sneak away through the countryside to escape with his life. When the political situation calmed down, he would eventually obtain a pardon, and he spent the next part of his early life having all sorts of wild adventures and military service. He had military service in Asia, he got kidnapped by pirates, and he had lots of affairs and love affairs. All sorts of wild shit. After years building up his reputation and military skills, Caesar returns to Rome and starts to get more involved in Roman politics, working his way up and making alliances with powerful people. Eventually, he would ally himself with two of the most powerful men in Rome, and together they would form what is called the First Triumvirate, which was a conspiracy between these three men that would change the course of history. The two other guys involved were Pompey, who was a beloved and celebrated military hero, and Crassus, who was a obscenely wealthy and well-connected man. And the three would leverage their influence to make sure each of them got their own way. And what Caesar got out of this arrangement was the head of an army headed to Gaul. Gaul was a territory where modern-day France is, and to the Romans, this place was filled with terrifying tribes of barbarians, and all of the things that came with that. Druids, magic, human sacrifice, etc. But Caesar saw this place as an opportunity, because if he successfully pacified it and brought it into the Roman fold, he could bring himself and the state tremendous wealth. In a sense, he was correct about that too. Gaul would become an extremely important province for hundreds of years after Caesar's conquest. So in 58 BC, Caesar found a questionable pretense for war and marched his legions into this terrifying foreign land. Over the next 8 years, Caesar and the Roman legions would systematically wipe out the opposing Gallic tribes, and he would do it through strategic military means and through exploiting differences between the tribes to pit them against each other. Really not so dissimilar from Cortez's conquest of Mexico. The Gauls eventually united under a man named Vercingetorix, who came close to actually pushing the Romans out of his homeland. A major battle happened at the town of Alesia, which is near modern-day Dijon, that led to Vercingetorix's surrender and the end of the resistance in Gaul. Now, as this is going on, a couple major things happened back in Rome that would shake up the political structure at the time. Now, at the other end of the empire, Crassus, the rich guy from the First Triumvirate, would lead an invasion towards Parthia. Crassus was not the military genius that Caesar was, and the Parthians were certainly no pushovers. Crassus and his legions would be misled into following the Parthians deep into the desert, and they were overextended and exposed. And eventually they were surrounded and picked apart at the Battle of Carrhae. Legend had it that Crassus himself was killed and had molten gold poured down his throat to quench his thirst for riches. So with Crassus out of the picture, the triumvirate was down to 2 members. And to add another strain to this relationship, the person that tied them together, Livia, who was Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, also passed away. It should also be noted that Caesar and Pompey were very egotistical men who had no interest in being subordinate to each other, which really increased the likelihood for conflict here. In 50 BC, as Caesar is wrapping up in Gaul, his enemies in Rome are demanding that he return home and stand for trial for accusations against him. Some of these accusations were legitimate concern for the wake of destruction he just left in Gaul, and the blatant corruption that he was known for. Caesar was very wary to let his enemies have an opportunity to pin him on any of this. The Roman Senate demanded that he disband his legions, and tension was building because everyone knew that Caesar might act like Sulla did, and rather than disband his legions, he could march into the city and enforce his own rules. So the Senate recruited Pompey to lead their cause in case Caesar went AWOL and didn't decide to lay down his arms. And this famously happened when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, a decisive act of rebellion against the Senate's orders, which directly led to civil war. The moment has obviously had a lot of dramatism added to it in retrospect because of its importance, and Caesar is supposed to have said, "Let the die be cast," as he made this decision. Caesar would win the civil war, in part because of the loyalty and experience his men had gained in the years of campaigning at Gaul. He would show leniency and mercy to the Romans he defeated, and it bought him a lot of support for this war. In 48 BC, the Battle of Pharsalus took place, and Caesar came out victorious against a superior force. After the battle, Pompey would retreat to Egypt, where he would seek refuge. When he arrived, he had his head cut off by the supposedly neutral Egyptians, and his pickled head was given to Caesar to win his favor. Caesar apparently wept at the sight. Caesar then would go on some side quests and have a very famous fling with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, and then he would wipe out all the simmering resistance to his rule in Egypt, Spain, and North Africa. He eventually made his way back to Rome in 45 BC. Soon after his return, Caesar would be declared dictator for life, and the stage was set for his imperial rule and mastery over the Roman state. This would effectively end the Roman Republic, which had been the structure of Roman politics for hundreds of years, and it ushered in a new era where power would be concentrated in the hands of one man. But things didn't work out for Caesar quite as he intended. The Roman Senate was still under the impression, which honestly may have been an illusion, that they could turn back the clock and return Rome to a legitimate republic if they could just remove Caesar. They planned a conspiracy to assassinate him on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. Ironically, that day Caesar showed up to meet the Senate at the theater of Pompey, where he was jumped by a mob of senators who had knives hidden under their togas. He would be murdered at the foot of the statue of his great rival, Pompey. After Caesar's murder, the assassins basically expected to be greeted as liberators by the Roman people, but much the opposite happened. It turned out the common people didn't care for the assassination, and they chased the assassins out of town. This unfortunately would lead to another round of civil wars, conspiracies, and chaos in Rome, until Caesar's great-nephew and heir, Octavian, later to be known as Augustus, managed to defeat all of the other groups fighting for control in Rome and stabilize things under his rule. After Augustus, the Roman Republic would be a distant memory, and an emperor would call the shots for the Roman people. Certain ceremonies would be kept to keep up the illusion of popular rule, but the reality was that Augustus and the emperors after him had total power. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see more of these, please like and subscribe. I hope to see you next time.